Good evening, friends. Welcome to Sleepytime Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find that your mind is plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Find your mind spinning and churning? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns but slowly letting go and drifting into the deep night. Before we go any further, I need to have a chat to some of you, particularly the longer running listeners. Are you someone who has been helped a lot or at all by Sleepytime Tales? Do you sleep more regularly now since you've discovered the show? And do you have the means to provide me with a little bit of support? If you can, please could you consider helping me grow the show by supporting me on the Patreon. My first priority is to do a little bit of an equipment upgrade. I want to get a decent mic and some other audio equipment to help me get a better signal down, because I want to grow the show and I really ultimately would like to do this full time. I would like to make more episodes, and I would like to have the time to do a little bit more creative work to help as many people as possible. So if you can, every little bit helps. If you have a dollar available in your budget every month, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who could find $1, that really will be helpful to me. I live in South Africa where technology is expensive, but the basic cost of living is actually not bad. So really anything can help. While a lot of people talk about their Patreons and about the benefits, the main thing I think to a listener should be is, am I helping you, and would you like to provide some support? But if you do provide some support, there are some benefits available to you. Even if you've got $1, you get something material. You get a shout out on an episode, and you get listed on the website in the thank you section, and you also get access to the catnap episodes. Now, the catnaps I release for Radio Public to try and encourage people to listen to it there, because I'm on the paid listens program. So I figure if you give me $1 a month, you can get those episodes as well in the Patreon feed, and you don't have to listen to any advertising, which you do on Radio Public. And then also, if you can go up to $5, you get the catnaps, you get the shout out, plus you get 2 special edits of every main episode. You get one without the promo section, so this whole bit where I talk to you about Patreon and any other ways to provide support you don't have to listen to. And there's also story-only edits for people who really don't like listening to the intro at all. And as a bonus to new $5 patrons in the next couple of months, everyone who signs up is going to get a handwritten postcard. So anyone who's interested, wants something fun in the mail, hit me up and help me out. So obviously, if the show is helping you, if it's helped you consistently or other people you care about, and you have the means, please consider providing a little bit of support. If you would like to provide some support and you can't actually afford to pay any money, and believe me, in this year of 2019, I completely understand, you can sign up for my Audible trial, which gives you a 30-day free trial and a free audiobook to keep, as well as providing quite a bit actually to help me out. So you can go to audibletrial.com/sleepytime or see the link in the show notes and follow through there and sign up and get your free audiobook. And also, if you do, I actually want to ask, if you do go to use the Audible trial, please let me know. Drop me a line, either email or through my social media, and let me know, because I'd like to actually thank you on the next episode following as well. And then also, if you would like to listen to the catnap episodes that I mentioned earlier, you can listen to those on Radio Public. I'm actually getting quite a few more people listening on Radio Public. That's actually a really big help. So thank you to those who are listening there. I do hope, I always say that I hope that the ads you get not too obtrusive, because at the end of the day, you're listening to the show to help you sleep. So if you're listening to ads that disturb you, I hope not. As usual, the music in this episode is Undisert by Kumiko. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I'll have linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff, which is definitely well worth your while to check out. And thanks, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepytime Tales? And what is a sleep podcast for? I'm going to answer your question by starting with a common problem. Do you find yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning and your emotions in turmoil, consumed with the anxieties of 21st century life? Do you find yourself lying awake in the middle of the night and not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to talk you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents, I gave them sleepless nights for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, I always struggled to sleep. It was actually around my mid-30s when I discovered that droning male voices have a tendency to put me to sleep. It happened when I was lying in bed at night listening to mostly video game podcasts, and I would suddenly find myself waking up at the music at the end, having missed everything that I was trying to listen to. I eventually started listening to podcasts specifically for the purpose of trying to get to sleep. And it took me a while, but I eventually found out that there are podcasts intended to help you to sleep. People that would tell you stories and hope that you actually did fall asleep while they were talking to you. The first one I tried out worked really, really well for me. I was quite impressed. But while it was specifically designed for the purpose of distracting the restless mind and very effective for me, I found that when I recommended it to other people, a lot of them didn't enjoy the narrator's voice because it was a little bit unusual. Not for everybody. And the thing with insomnia is it can be so variable. Like what one person will swear by will annoy the hell out of somebody else. So it's very difficult to know how people are going to react to things. So while I liked that show, others didn't. So I thought to myself, hey, I've got a weird, drony, boring voice. Why don't I try to do my own? And here we are. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It's there for a reason, despite the fact that some people honestly don't like it. But it's there like I say, it is there for a reason. The main thing is, for new listeners, I need to explain the purpose of the show and the thinking behind it, which is what I've been doing up till now. And then for longer term listeners, a lot of people do treat this as part of their sort of preparation for bedtime. It is what you do. It is what you do to, while you put it on in the background, maybe you go brush your teeth and have some water and get yourself in bed and turn the lights out. Probably do that before you get in bed. Make sure your room's warm but not too warm. It's slightly cooler actually helps get a good night's sleep, and then wrap yourself up in your blankets. It's a chance for them to prepare themselves and prepare their space. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build a space together. A nest even, for you to like curl up and get a good night's sleep. It's important that you as the listener engage with this the way that suits you best. For me, there are two ways that make sense, although there may be others that I don't even think of. If you engage with this in a different way, hey, let me know. I can share it with others. So basically the idea is how I engage with sleep podcasts is I listen to them quite closely, and my mind stays on one track rather than spinning around and stressing me out. What other people do is they just put the droning on in the background and let it sort of waft them to sleep. But what works for you is what counts. So find what works for you. Now, I'm building up to my sort of second season of the show, and one thing that's going to be fairly common is I'm going to be working on a 4-week cycle, and one of those episodes every cycle is going to be a movie review. So I did a movie review for my Patreon once, but it turned out not to be practical in terms of how much time it took me. So I'm doing a movie review. It's not going to be a full movie recap. It's going to be talk about the beginning section and a little bit of the story and concepts behind Spider-Man Far From Home, the most recent MCU Spider-Man movie. Be warned in advance, there will be spoilers. I'm not going to talk about the whole movie, but I'm going to get up to basically the big twist, which, if you follow comics at all, isn't a huge twist. It was kind of expected, but the Marvel folks are actually quite good at playing with expectations. So people thought maybe this twist wasn't going to happen. But anyway, that's for later. What is quite important, though, is however you engage with the story and with the podcast, you don't force it. For me, the best thing to do is just sort of keep a light mental grip on the story. Just something to keep the mind on a single track, and eventually I'll find myself just drifting into sleep. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but I don't want to pressure you. This long intro and the long boring story and the long boring movie review that's coming is all there to take pressure off. Also, if this is your first night with us, this may not work for you. It'll take maybe 2, 3, or 4 nights to start developing the habit to get that sort of almost Pavlovian stimulus and response that I get with sleep podcasts, where I just switch them on and I don't even make it to the promos on some of these things. Sometimes I'm just gone. It may not work on the first night. My voice may be a little bit strange to you. I've got a bit of an unusual accent. Maybe that takes getting used to. Maybe one episode isn't long enough if this is your first time. It's just important, though, that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, it may take a while for this to work for you, even a few days. So queue up a few episodes or just run through the backlog. What I usually do with sleep podcasts is I just let them stream all night. I lie down in the dark with my earbuds in and I just let them run. Sometimes when I wake up at 3 a.m, the stream is still running and I just let the voices waft me back to sleep. Sometimes I wake up 30 minutes before my alarm goes, and usually what I do is I still just carry on listening and I'm right back out again. And I don't know what, I've got my suspicions, but it's strange how that 30 minutes is sometimes just the most restful part of my night. There's something about allowing yourself to just completely relax right before the alarm that is deeply satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you. I'm here to improve your life. People don't sleep well these days, and it makes life harder. So I'm here to do a small part to help you through that, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well-rested and better able to cope. One of my big central things, and it's a struggle for me in my real life, but it's important in my family life and in this show, is kindness is really the center of what I'm trying to do. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And what's very important is I need you to be kind to yourself. If you can't fall asleep even with me here in your ears, don't rebuke yourself and don't get angry with yourself over not sleeping. I remember when I was younger, I used to get so frustrated sometimes. I used to actually almost hate myself in my exhaustion. But that doesn't help. It doesn't help you to get frustrated. Frustration gets in the way of a good night's sleep. The main intention of this podcast, however you engage with it, is to short-circuit frustration, to distract that feeling that we get when we blame ourselves and just can't let go and drift into sleep. So take a breath, forgive the fact that you can't sleep, and let my voice wash over and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep can feel like an enemy, but it isn't. It's a natural part of our lives. It's a part of our organism, and we've been pulled away from it by stress and life and technology that shines these bright blue lights in our eyes at all hours. So I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Sleepytime Tales movie review for Spider-Man Far From Home. Please be warned that there will be spoilers for parts of Far From Home, although I'm not going to do a full recap of the movie. I'm only going to talk in specific about the early parts, and maybe a few other little twists and turns. So I'm not going to tell you the whole movie, but if you're very spoiler averse, this is one to come back to later. And we'll also I will be spoiling Avengers Endgame and Infinity War. So just be forewarned. So to start with the basics. Spider-Man Far From Home is the second standalone Spider-Man movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starring Tom Holland as Peter Parker and the titular friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Holland has also played the role in Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame. Now, while I'm not the biggest comic fan, I've always enjoyed them, but they are living in South Africa. Firstly, when I was young, Marvel and DC comics weren't available because of sanctions back in the bad old days. Every now and then you could pick up a comic that just randomly showed up at the supermarket. But DC and Marvel were pretty rare. You could get sometimes EC Comics and other stranger imprints, but often they were decades old, and I don't even know where they came from, how people found them. It was quite strange. And then when the when the comics did come back to South Africa in the 90s, when I was in high school, they came out extremely expensive, and we were far too poor to be buying them. And they're still far too expensive. Although I used to love going to the bookshop near my work and reading through what was on the shelf. So now, while I'll admit to being a giant nerd, I'm actually not that, I wouldn't call myself particularly knowledgeable about comics. So my approach to comic media is a little bit different to a lot of most nerdy white guys, to be honest. I did have Marvel Unlimited for their free trial period. They give you a 60-day free trial, which is quite fun. I read mostly Ms. Marvel and Matt Fraction's Iron Man comics at that stage. So my main knowledge from Spider-Man really is the 90s TV series, animated TV series, from hanging around with other nerds, and the more recent movies, starting with the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. So my relationship with nerd media is a little bit unusual as far as that sort of thing goes. In fact, in a lot of ways, I'm a bit of an unusual nerd. I discovered my nerdiness quite a bit later in life. Well, I was always a giant dork, but my actual fondness for nerd, sort of geek media came much later. So I will never claim I'm any kind of expert on comics or superheroes or anything like that. And I've really enjoyed the recent explosion of superhero media, even if the movies aren't always perfect. A lot of people are getting tired of the Marvel movies, but not me. I'm really enjoying them. Because as much as they're all superhero movies with big third act battles, generally speaking, there's quite a lot of variety in the movies. Although I really do think I wish they would come up with something a little bit more creative in that third act, rather than a big CGI enhanced fight, which honestly is often the most boring part of the movie, the supposed climax. I also really, really admire the ambition of the Marvel Cinematic Universe project to do something that runs over so many movies and even TV shows to an extent, although the early Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't quite work out as planned. I still solidly enjoy it and I recommend it. To do a multi-movie project over the better part of a decade is, honestly, I'm not sure that there's a media project quite like it that I can think of. So, anyway, to Spider-Man. Now, the movie starts with a montage. It's a little bit surprising at first at how badly made it is. It's cut together clip art and Comic Sans typeface writing in memoriam. A whole lot of pictures of Tony Stark. Many of them as Iron Man, many of them as his early stages in his career as an arms dealer, which probably towards the later part of his life he would not want to be seen commemorated. And it's playing along with Whitney Houston's version of I Will Always Love You, the most obvious version of it. And I'm also 98.5% sure Tony Stark would hate it. I think he would like the Dolly Parton version because that is really gorgeous. Whitney Houston was an amazing singer, but I'll Always Love You I don't think was the best use of her talents, to be honest. We see, as the montage goes on, that it is actually a video made as part of a high school news broadcast. It cuts from the montage to two presenters, a young boy and a young girl, who talk about the weirdness of returning from what they call the blip, which many fans of the movies call the snap, the 5-year, I think it was, period where everybody disappeared between Thanos snapping his fingers and them all being returned by Hulk. I nearly forgot, I forgot for a second who returned them, all the people. It was the Hulk who snapped them all back. The young boy presenting, around 16 years old, he's the same age as Peter Parker's class. He talks about his younger brother now being his older brother, which was very strange for him. I can only imagine how weird that must be. The blonde girl is presenting with him, makes a snarky comment about, yes, that's how maths works, where he was just sort of trying to come to terms with a rather shocking situation for him, I'm sure. There's quite a funny clip of the high school band and people watching a performance before a match on a basketball court, all disappearing into dust as a la Avengers Infinity War. And it cuts to the band all reappearing, busy playing their music in the middle of a basketball match, and a whole bunch of them getting knocked over by players. We cut to Peter and his friend Ned, who are talking. Peter, being the nerdy boy, who I actually now see why I really liked the Spider-Man TV show when in the 90s. Peter was like my guy, nerdy guy, slightly funny, although probably not as funny as he thinks, with a tendency to overthink things. Peter has a very detailed plan to tell MJ how he feels about her, because he realized that he's in love with her and he wants to find out if the feelings are mutual. He notices that she keeps watching him all the time. He's going over a very detailed plan. Ned tells him, the seventh stage of the plan is the important one. Don't do any of that because we need to be bachelors in Europe, because he doesn't know much, but he knows that Europeans love Americans, which suggests he doesn't really pay too much attention to the news. But then also in the Marvel universe, maybe that's true. I'm sure Europeans actually generally do like Americans. The whole rivalry between Europeans and Americans, I think, is probably overstated in the media. Yeah, anyway, as they're talking, Ned is trying to persuade Peter to rather enjoy being his single life while they're in Europe. But Peter really wants to explore this situation with MJ. MJ walks up while they're talking. I'm going to say Zendaya is she's actually a remarkably good actress. She's very believable in pretty much any role I've seen her in. I'm not all that familiar with her work. She seems to be a fun person, and she's very believable in any role I've ever seen her in. So she's a very attractive young woman, and she usually plays, as far as I've seen, plays pretty girls, but as the slightly kooky, spooky MJ, which is a very interesting representation of the character. Pretty unique in most Marvel media, as I've seen. Mary Jane is usually a wannabe actress and homecoming queen type. Zendaya's MJ is not that at all. Ned mentions talking about Peter's plan. She wants to know what the plan is. Ned just lies terribly to cover up and says that Peter's planning on collecting spoons as they travel through Europe. MJ says, "Oh, that's cool, like an old lady." Peter says, "I'm not planning on collecting spoons, that's Ned's plan." And they all just act really suspicious and odd. And I can't remember, she says something before she leaves. It's like, "Thanks for being weird," or something like that. We cut to the evening where there's now a public event. Aunt May is giving a speech about returning from the blip. She rematerialized in her home had obviously had new tenants living in it. He tells stories about the woman of the lady of the house thought she was the man of the house's mistress, and there was a whole lot of confusion about where she suddenly came from, because now obviously that everyone was gone for 5 years, people weren't paying rent, people moved into each other's houses. So she is actually at a fundraiser for people who returned from the blip who've been rendered homeless. Because, obviously people are appearing from 5 years gone. They don't have jobs waiting for them. They don't have homes. Who knows what sort of thing would have happened. It must have been a rather traumatic time for a lot of people. Peter is there, dressed as Spider-Man. He's in the Iron Spider suit. The one that's very shiny with that grows extra legs out the back. May invites him to say something. He says a few words very badly. I didn't make notes of exactly what they were, but he sounds extremely awkward. She says a few more words. They go out. They go into a kitchen in the back. May says she felt really awkward and stiff. Peter says, no, you were great. She says, well, in that case, you weren't. So she was obviously setting him up for a bit of an execution to sort of criticize his performance. Peter's a nerdy schoolboy, even despite being a superhero, so he's not really a big one for public events. Happy, played by Jon Favreau, Tony Stark's former assistant / bodyguard / driver / whatever, arrives carrying a huge check with, I think it said $500 million on it. That's going to do quite a lot of work for rehousing people. He mentions he's got trouble finding it because it was a really big one. And then it becomes a very strange interaction between him and May, very awkward. Looks like they're trying not to flirt, and yet they are slightly flirting. And there's a definite suggestion of chemistry there. Peter just looks backwards and forwards between them while the exchange goes on. Aunt May leaves. Peter quizzes Happy. Happy sort of distracts from the conversation and tells Peter that Fury is going to be calling him. Obviously Nick Fury from S.H.I.E.L.D. Peter's phone rings. It's an unknown number, and Peter just hangs it up. He goes out to a meet and greet to meet all the guests for the fundraiser. Happy's phone rings, and Happy answers it, and he says, yes, no, he's not ghosting you, and walks out of the room. Peter is now being interviewed by a bunch of reporters and other people. There's a lot of questions about who's going to be the next Tony Stark, what's going to happen in the next alien invasion. Now, we got a sort of, this representation of Spider-Man in the MCU is a little bit different to a lot of the traditional representations. There's different Spider-Man storylines. This particular one, the MCU, is very similar to a lot of aspects of Ultimate Spider-Man, which is a more recent TV show and a series of comics through the early 2000s, where Peter gets involved more in cosmic events and large-scale events, as opposed to the more traditional friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who catches muggers and that sort of thing, rather than getting involved with well, he gets involved with supervillains, but they're usually small-scale supervillains that want to rob places and steal technology rather than destroy half the universe. That's unusual stakes for a Spider-Man story. So Peter would much rather be catching muggers and burglars and jewel thieves rather than worrying about existential crises. And as they're quizzing him about this sort of thing, he starts to freak out and has his seems like a little bit of a panic attack. He just bails and gets on top of the building and sort of pulls himself towards himself. We then go to back at their house, back at their apartment. He's busy packing for school. Aunt May is trying to get him to pack his Spider-Man suit, but he refuses to take it. Well, he says he's going to, and then he doesn't pack it because he just wants to go on vacation. He's not interested in going and being Spider-Man. He doesn't think anything's going to happen that's going to require him to take any kind of action. So he leaves on a school trip, and he finds when they get to Italy, the airport in Italy, his bag, a very old suitcase, gets sniffed by a dog. One of the looks like a bomb sniffer or drug sniffing dogs. So he's made to open it, and he finds that his Spider-Man suit is inside, and he's opened it right in front of a customs officer. He looks horrified. He's trying to make excuses, talk about the costume, but in our world, people love cosplay of superheroes, so I'm pretty sure that in a world that with actual superheroes, people must cosplay as them quite a lot. So she's not particularly interested. She's just noticed that there's a banana, which is obviously contraband. You can't carry plants across international borders generally. So she takes his banana away, and that's the end of that. He meets up at the school with the rest of his class, and they carry on with the journey. Something else that came up on their flight there were a couple of little events. It turns out that one of their classmates, a guy called Brad, who was a little kid when they all got snapped and is now a rather well-built young man, is emerged as a competitor for MJ's affections. Peter tries to engineer a seat swap so that he can sit with MJ through the trip, but he ends up stuck for the whole trip with the teacher. And while Brad and MJ end up sitting together, and Ned ends up sitting with Ned ends up sitting next to Betty, who was the girl from the school news reporter. And in the course of the flight, Brad and MJ seem to be getting very close, and Ned and Betty end up suddenly in a relationship by the time they land in Europe, which of course Peter was quite surprised by, because Ned wanted to be a young American bachelor in Europe. Yet he ended up with a girlfriend by the time they got there. While they're at this stage they're in Venice, there's a sudden attack of what we later find out is a water elemental. The water goes crazy and starts wreaking havoc. Peter is obviously not dressed as Spider-Man. He didn't bring his suit, but he does have his web shooters, and he's about to start taking action. And another superhero with a very fancy costume shows up, and with a helmet that looks a lot like a smoke-filled fishbowl. We find out that the character goes by the name Quentin Beck at this point, but he uses magic that looks a lot like Doctor Strange's magic, except it's green instead of orange and yellow, to fight off the creature. Peter goes around using his web spinners to try to prevent too much damage. He tries to hold towers and stuff up, mostly unsuccessfully, but he does help prevent too much damage, or at least damage that risks people. Peter gets pulled out of his hotel room by Nick Fury, who darts Ned to do it. They take him to an underground meeting where Peter gets given a pair of sunglasses of Tony Stark's. We find out later that those are equipped with an artificial intelligence called Edith, which has access to pretty much everything of Stark Industries and orbital weapons and all sorts of stuff. Peter also meets Quentin Beck, who claims to be from a parallel universe when the elementals killed his family and destroyed pretty much his whole Earth in his parallel universe as part of the multiverse. Peter decides he doesn't want to go with Fury to help fight the elementals. I think he's a little bit traumatized still about the events that happened before. And he just wants to be a 16-year-old for a little while. One thing that I missed was while they were at the hotel, the kids were at the hotel, they were watching the news, and the newscasters and journalists referred to a mysterious figure, but in Italian it was Mysterio. So when Peter saw him, he called him Mysterio, and Quentin Beck decides to adopt that name as his effectively superhero name. Now, I don't want to get too much into what follows, because as I said up at the beginning, I'm not going to do a full recap of the movie. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the performances, though, and I'm going to make a big spoiler here. Something that people who do follow the comics and a lot of the other comic media did know, but you may not know if you just were going on the trailers and the movie up to this point, is Mysterio is actually quite well known as a very sort of like C-level bad guy in Marvel movies, or rather in Marvel comics. He's never a major player, but he's well known as a con man and using illusions to make himself look like a hero. And so, not particularly superpowered, but uses technology. And we find out the case with Quentin Beck, brilliantly played by Jake Gyllenhaal. I think he's a very underrated actor. I don't know if he's underrated or overrated, but people don't generally talk about him much, but I think he's a fine actor. Jarhead is one of my all-time favorite movies. Probably top 10, thinking about it, maybe even top 5. I'm not really a big one for favorites. I just like things in general. I either really like or really dislike things. That's just my nature. So Jake Gyllenhaal really does this weird, creepy intensity, and he's very believable as someone who's trying to be Peter's father figure and friend. And he's also extremely believable as a full psychopath who's trying to manipulate people into thinking he's a hero so he can make money. So quite a few people before the movie actually were thinking it was possible that Marvel was going to pull another little trick. Now, in Marvel Comics, Skrulls generally, the shape-shifting aliens from Endgame and and Captain Marvel, of course, are usually villains. They infiltrate and spy, and the MCU seems to be building up to something based on Secret Wars from the comics. But the Skrulls we've encountered in the movies so far, actually, as it turns out, are not villains. They're largely misunderstood. Although it's possible that there are going to be villain Skrulls later. I mean, a whole race of villains, a whole race of heroes, kind of problematic. So we may end up with villain Skrulls anyway in Secret Wars. But Kevin Feige and his crew do play with expectations a little bit. So people were thinking it was possible that Mysterio might turn out not to be a villain. But, well, he did. He was part of a whole team of disgruntled Stark employees who decided to use technology that they developed and that Stark had not appreciated to take over the world basically once he was out of the way, or to rather make themselves rich. Just yeah, it's a very enjoyable movie. It's a lot of fun, great performances. It is quite sad though that it was the last of the Tom Holland MCU Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man movies, because I wasn't too sure early on about that really high-tech stuff, but he gets into a more traditional suit later without all the armor and fancy technology. It still has some, but it's not quite as overbearing. And Tom Holland is a fantastic performer. If you haven't seen it, you also need to see his lip sync battle from lip sync battle cover version, or performance rather, of Umbrella by Rihanna. He's a fantastic dancer too. And yeah, it's a shame that we're going to see the end of it, because Disney basically tried to take a little bit too much advantage of their success, licensing the Spider-Man character from Sony. Licensing stuff for Marvel stuff is really weird. In the 80s and 90s, Marvel was very short of money, so they licensed all their good heroes out to other companies, particularly Fox and Sony, which is why when they launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they started it with C-level characters like Iron Man and Black Widow, who have since become major characters thanks to the success of the movies, although sadly they're still not really selling comics. So yeah, it's a shame we're not going to see more of those, or of these characters, particularly with the post-credit scene of Far From Home, which set up a very messy situation for young Peter Parker. But I suppose there's still a hope, but it's highly unlikely. And anyway, so that's my first of my movie reviews. That we will be seeing some of these once every 4-week cycle that I have planned out. Hope you enjoyed it. In fact, no, I hope you didn't. I hope you're asleep. So thanks once again for joining me on this episode of the Sleepytime Tales podcast. The podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Komiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you will find links in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.